Conor McGregor has officially confirmed that he will return to the UFC this summer, and all signs are now pointing toward a rematch with Max Holloway at UFC 329 on July 11th in Las Vegas. So, let's break down everything surrounding McGregor's comeback and why this fight, out of all the possible matchups, is the one the UFC appears to be targeting. Conor McGregor has not competed inside the UFC Octagon since July 10th, 2021. That was the night at UFC 264 when he suffered a brutal broken tibia and fibula at the end of the first round against Dustin Poirier. McGregor was carried out of the T-Mobile Arena on a stretcher. That image, the biggest superstar in UFC history being wheeled away, was expected to be only a temporary ending. Instead, it has lasted almost 5 years. Now, McGregor himself has confirmed that he will fight at a UFC event scheduled for July 11th, 2026, in Las Vegas. Dana White has now backed it up. Ariel Helwani, arguably the most connected journalist in MMA, is also putting his reputation on the line by reporting it, and the opponent appears to be Max Holloway, the same man McGregor defeated 13 years ago when neither fighter was a global star yet. But fans have heard this story before. McGregor was already expected to return in 2024. He was scheduled to headline UFC 303 on June 29th against Michael Chandler. A sold-out press conference in Dublin had been arranged. Training camp was already underway. Then, just hours before the event, everything was suddenly canceled. McGregor later explained that he had broken his pinky toe during training. Without being able to train properly with full protection, he decided to withdraw. It marked the first time in his UFC career that he had ever pulled out of a scheduled fight. That cancellation triggered a domino effect. Michael Chandler was left waiting without answers. The UFC quickly adjusted plans and eventually booked Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochaska as the replacement main event. Chandler later went on to lose fights against Paddy Pimblett and Charles Oliveira, while the long-awaited McGregor matchup never became reality. Then, in October 2025, the situation became even more complicated. McGregor received an 18-month suspension under the UFC's anti-doping policy after missing 3 separate drug tests in 2024. He failed to provide biological samples on June 13th, September 19th, and September 20th of that year. These were not failed tests for banned substances. Instead, they were whereabouts violations, meaning testers could not find him at the locations he had listed at SASADA. The organization managing the UFC's anti-doping system reduced the usual 24-month suspension down to 18 months because McGregor cooperated fully and was still recovering from injury during that period. The suspension was officially backdated to September 20th, 2024, making him eligible to compete again starting March 20th, 2026. And now, just 2 months after becoming eligible again, it finally feels real. For the first time in years, McGregor's comeback genuinely looks like it is going to happen. So, what changed? And more importantly, why Max Holloway? Every McGregor comeback story usually follows the same pattern. McGregor uploads training clips. Fans begin speculating. Dana White stays vague. And then the fight either happens or falls apart. But this time, the tone coming from the UFC's top leadership has sounded noticeably different, with multiple signs strongly suggesting that McGregor will indeed fight this summer. Dana White did not avoid the question the way he normally does. When he was asked whether Conor McGregor had already fought his last fight, White gave a direct answer instead of dodging it. He said, "We're in a great place with Conor. I'm extremely confident that Conor will fight this year." He even added more details by saying, "He's training. There's footage out there. He'll fight this summer." That level of confidence from Dana White is important. Just 1 year earlier, he was openly suggesting that McGregor might never return to the Octagon again. After UFC 303 fell apart, White told Jim Rome that McGregor was already 36 years old, financially set for life, and that when fighters reach that level of fame and success, you never really know if they will ever fight again. The difference between those comments and what White said this May is massive. White also spoke about the financial side of bringing McGregor back in the UFC's new streaming era, since the promotion moved away from the traditional pay-per-view model. The system that once earned McGregor tens of millions of dollars has changed completely. McGregor himself previously stated that without the old pay-per-view structure, His current UFC contract, which reportedly still has 2 fights remaining, was basically meaningless. That became a major issue because McGregor is still the biggest pay-per-view attraction in UFC history, and his entire pay structure was designed around those record-breaking numbers. However, Dana White insisted that the financial side has already been solved. He told reporters, "The money part is handled. There's a formula to it. McGregor's going to do just fine." White explained that the UFC now calculates fighter compensation using the average performance of their past pay-per-view numbers. According to him, the company has already used this same formula with several other fighters as well. That means one of the biggest roadblocks preventing McGregor's return now appears to be completely resolved. The timing and location of the event also reveal a lot. McGregor originally pushed hard to compete on the UFC White House card scheduled for June 14th, but he was ultimately left off the lineup. For someone like McGregor, who thrives on huge stages and major headlines, missing out on a White House event was probably frustrating, but it now seems the UFC had an even bigger platform planned for him. International Fight Week, taking place from July 9th through July 12th in Las Vegas, is considered the UFC's biggest annual celebration. UFC 329, scheduled for July 11th, is the centerpiece of that entire week, and that is reportedly where McGregor's comeback is expected to happen. The strategy behind that decision is easy to understand. The White House event is more about spectacle and political attention. International Fight Week, on the other hand, is completely focused on the sport itself. It is the UFC's version of the Super Bowl or WrestleMania. Putting McGregor's return on that stage guarantees maximum promotion, massive fan interest, and huge financial success. Dana White clearly understands the value of that moment. While Dana White's comments provided the official confidence, Ariel Helwani's reporting supplied the specific details, and Helwani has pushed this story harder than almost any report he has covered in recent years. Helwani was the first journalist to reveal that Max Holloway would likely be McGregor's comeback opponent. He reported it weeks ago and has continued standing by the story despite heavy criticism and skepticism from many people in the MMA world. Former fighter and analyst Chael Sonnen publicly questioned Helwani's information. Other media personalities also doubted the report. The UFC itself had still not officially confirmed anything, but Helwani never backed away from his claims. On May 9th, during a live show in New York ahead of UFC 328 in Newark, Helwani stated that the UFC would announce McGregor's return within the next 24 hours or so. He even aimed comments directly at Chael Sonnen, saying he was about to prove him wrong once the announcement became official, but the announcement never came. UFC 328 passed without any confirmation, leaving many fans disappointed and leading some people to criticize Helwani for speaking too early. After the event, Dana White clarified that no final agreement with McGregor had been completed yet, although he also admitted that he felt far more confident this year compared to last year. Then things became even more interesting. On the Monday episode of a show following UFC 328, Helwani directly addressed what already leaked it publicly. Helwani said, "Very likely they see that and think, let's save it. We don't want him to be right." He pointed out 200 before the UFC officially announced it. At that time, the UFC famously punished Helwani for leaking the information early. Helwani's comments on his May 11th show were about as strong as a journalist can possibly make them without physically holding signed contracts. He said, "As of right now, they're on the goal line. Something awful has to happen for this fight not to happen on July 11th. Agreement already appears to be signed, while the remaining details are still being finalized." Helwani then doubled down even harder by publicly challenging everyone who doubted him. He said, "I will never get fight bookings and matchups wrong. If you don't believe me, you're going to be proven wrong." That is an enormous statement from someone who has won MMA Journalist of the Year 15 times. He is fully putting his reputation behind this report. Out of every possible opponent available for McGregor, whether it was Michael Chandler, Jorge Masvidal, or even a younger contender, the UFC appears to have chosen Max Holloway. And honestly, once you look at the reasoning behind it, the decision makes a lot of sense. McGregor and Holloway first fought on August 17, 2013, at UFC Fight Night 26. It was a featherweight fight placed on the preliminary card. Long before either fighter became one of the biggest stars in the sport, McGregor was only competing in his second UFC fight at the time, while Holloway was just 21 years old and still developing as a fighter. McGregor won the bout by unanimous decision, with all three judges scoring it 30-27 in his favor. However, the victory came with a serious cost. During the fight, McGregor tore his ACL, an injury that forced him out of action for nearly a full year afterward. It was a dominant win on the scorecards, but it left lasting physical damage. What happened after that fight is what makes this rematch so fascinating. McGregor went on one of the greatest runs in UFC history. He knocked out Jose Aldo in just 13 seconds, became the first fighter ever to hold two UFC titles simultaneously after stopping Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205, and later crossed over into boxing to face Floyd Mayweather. He evolved into the biggest combat sports superstar on the planet, but Holloway's rise inside the sport itself may have been even more impressive. After losing to McGregor, Holloway put together an incredible streak of 18 victories and eventually captured the featherweight championship. He defended the belt multiple times against elite opponents, defeating names like Jose Aldo twice, Brian Ortega, and Frankie Edgar. The only losses during that incredible run came against former champion Alexander Volkanovski, and all three of those fights were extremely competitive. Following the third Volkanovski defeat, Holloway rebounded in spectacular fashion. He won back-to-back fights before producing one of the most unforgettable finishes in UFC history, a brutal fifth-round knockout of Justin Gaethje at UFC 300 to capture the BMF title. That knockout is already viewed as one of the most iconic moments the UFC has ever seen. So now, the 21-year-old prospect McGregor, defeated on a preliminary card back in 2013, has become one of the greatest featherweights of all time and a legitimate all-time MMA legend. The storyline almost writes itself. Can McGregor, after nearly 5 years away from MMA competition, Holloway's most recent fight ended in defeat. Charles Oliveira beat him by unanimous decision over 5 rounds at UFC 326 in March to capture the BMF belt. Because of that, some people may view this as an ability to absorb punishment while continuing to pressure forward make him a nightmare matchup for anyone, especially someone who has not fought in nearly half a decade. And Holloway clearly wants the fight as well. During a live stream on Kick, he openly discussed there's even been another unusual detail adding fuel to the rumors. An EA Sports UFC 6 trailer reportedly featured Holloway knocking out McGregor, which immediately sent fans into speculation mode. Video game promotions usually do not highlight completely random matchups. More often than not, they promote fights connected to upcoming UFC plans. With all of this momentum, all of these hints, and all of these near confirmations, it is important to separate what we actually know from what is still speculation. What we do know is this: McGregor's anti-doping suspension officially ended on March 20th, 2026, meaning he is fully eligible to compete again. He has reportedly been tested 8 times already in 2026, more than double any other fighter on the UFC roster. He is actively training and posting footage online that many fans believe shows him looking sharp and explosive again. Dana White has publicly stated that McGregor will fight this summer. A specific date, July 11th, has already been repeatedly mentioned, and the most trusted journalist in MMA, Ariel Helwani, has identified Max Holloway as the opponent. What we still do not completely know is whether every contract has been officially finalized. Dana White himself admitted that the deal is not fully completed yet, and Helwani has acknowledged the same thing. It appears that at least one side has already signed, but the final paperwork is still being finished. And if fans have learned anything from McGregor's comeback saga over the years, from the canceled Chandler fight to multiple failed comeback attempts, it is that nothing is truly real until the Octagon door closes behind both fighters. McGregor still has 2 fights remaining on his UFC contract. He is now 37 years old and has not fought in MMA for almost 5 years. His recent UFC record is also far from dominant. Since 2018, his only victory inside the Octagon was a 42-second destruction of Donald Cerrone. Outside of that, he suffered 2 losses to Dustin Poirier and was submitted by Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229. That means McGregor's MMA record since 2018 stands at just 1-3. The version of McGregor returning in July is not the same unstoppable force that tore through the featherweight and lightweight divisions between 2013 and 2016. The UFC fully understands that reality, and that is exactly why the Holloway fight makes sense both competitively and commercially. IT is a rematch carrying massive name value against an opponent McGregor has already beaten once before. It gives McGregor a perfect storyline to promote. It also gives the UFC a fight casual fans, especially the audience that only tunes in for McGregor, will instantly care about. And if McGregor loses, it does not hurt the UFC's title picture because no championship is on the line. The UFC 329 card is already starting to take shape, with 5 fights reportedly confirmed and rumors continuing to grow about Amanda Nunes facing Kayla Harrison in a possible co-main event title fight. The infrastructure for the event is already being built. The real question is not whether UFC 329 is happening. The question is whether McGregor will actually be part of it. And right now, every credible source says yes. Ariel Helwani believes something disastrous would need to happen for the fight not to take place. Dana White says he is extremely confident. McGregor himself has already confirmed the July 11th date. Holloway continues hinting at the matchup without officially confirming it, while reportedly training as though the deal is already done. But this is still Conor McGregor. This is the fighter who snapped his leg in the middle of a fight. The fighter who broke his toe just weeks before the biggest comeback attempt of his career. The fighter who missed 3 drug tests and ended up suspended for 18 months. Until July 11th finally arrives and both men actually walk into the Octagon. The MMA world will remain nervous because fans have experienced the situation before. They have stood on the goal line before, only to watch everything collapse at the last second. And being on the goal line is not the same thing as reaching the end zone. What feels different this time is the sheer number of factors aligning together at once. The suspension is over. The training camp is active. The financial negotiations reportedly appear settled. The opponent has been identified. Dana White is openly discussing the fight on national radio. All of those details together create a level of confidence that previous McGregor comeback attempts simply never had. This is no longer just McGregor posting tweets or fans desperately hoping. This looks like the UFC machine moving in one very clear direction. Whether that machine ultimately delivers Conor McGregor into the Octagon against Max Holloway on July 11th remains to be seen. But for the first time in nearly 5 years, it no longer feels like a question of if. It feels like a question of when. And the date appears set, July 11th, 2026, UFC 329, International Fight Week, Las Vegas, McGregor versus Holloway, 13 years later.